So, quick questions. How many of you here come out of a Quaker ancestry? Really? One and two, myself. My mother's side were Quakers, and they came here to what they believed was the New World, Europeans settling in the Americas, here in what's now the United States. They came to Virginia as Quakers in the late 1600s, and as Quakers, they belonged to what was called a meeting house, a community of believers, and they first lived in Virginia. My sixth great uncle, whatever it was, back in the late 1600s, early 1700s, operated a skiff. It's a flat boat that moved people from Virginia across the Shenandoah River into the wilds of America at that time, when Europeans were moving across the country to settle what is now the United States of America. And from there, the people married, stayed Quakers, moved down to South Carolina. One of my great-great-great-great-grandfathers is buried not too far from here over in South Carolina. Then they moved up to Ohio, and some eventually made their way into Canada. And one of the things that was quite, to me, still impressive about the Quakers is that they were very centered on the peace of God and working and trying to create peace in the community. They believed in equity among men and women. Women had an equal voice in the community. They were also abolitionists. They did not believe in slavery, which is part of the reason they kept moving north, eventually into Canada. And I was kind of a proud part of my history. And Beth and I one year followed the path, at least from Virginia down to South Carolina and then up through Ohio, of my Quaker ancestors. But I learned along the way that there was a splinter group from the Quakers, and they were called Shakers. And I'm guessing if none of you came from a Quaker lineage, or one did, that you probably didn't come from a Shaker lineage. The Shakers were a splinter group from the Quakers, and they were called Shakers because they were shaking Quakers. Like Quakers, they gathered among the meeting house. They lived in kind of communal villages and communes. They ate from common tables. They didn't necessarily have preachers. They had different people standing up to speak and teach in community. But they also were known to shake in worship. They had kind of ecstatic worship experiences, something akin maybe to a Pentecostal experience. And so they were coined the shaking Quakers. A lot of singing, a lot of dancing in worship. Don, they did not do any snake handling, so I think we were okay. Don, when I first came here, Don said, Pastor Mark, you can do or say just about anything you want, but if you bring those snakes out, we're in trouble. We're going to get rid of you. But one of the things the Shakers were famous for is this statement, hearts to God, hands to work. They believed, like the hymn we sang at the beginning of worship, that worship and work must be one. That you can't worship God and not take care of the poor or take care of the needy. You can't worship God and not also have God in your daily labors. God has to be part of it. They had that saying, hearts to God, hands to work. They believed that worship and the work of mission were two sides to the same street. You may be on the path, so kind of going toward the building of shalom on earth, or the path of moving closer and closer to God in your life, but there were two paths on that one street. One was worship, honoring the Sabbath, and one was the work that we did with our hands, the labors of our hearts and the labors of our hands, which I often share at the prayer of thanksgiving each Sunday. Jesus put it this way. Jesus said you've got to love God with all your heart, your soul, your strength, and your mind. And the second greatest commandment is you've got to love your neighbor as one of your own. Two sides of the same street. Loving God, but also doing mission, doing work, loving and caring for our neighbors. Well, today I want to begin exploring one side of that same street. It's the Sabbath. I want to explore together a little bit, what does it mean for us here in the 21st century to honor the Sabbath or to worship the Lord so to speak, as we sang in the hymn today. I want to know, kind of explore what the meaning of Sabbath could be for us today, or the importance of not trampling on the Sabbath, to use the words of the prophet Isaiah, which I read to you today from the 58th chapter. He said, don't trample on the Sabbath. My hope is that in exploring the Sabbath, what it is to love God with our hearts and love God and neighbor with our hands, my hope is that over the next 3 weeks we might begin to reclaim the practice of Sabbath as a time for us, not just as individuals, but as a church, to re-center ourselves in God, to relocate ourselves as individuals, as a church, and if I could be so audacious, maybe influence others so that we as a nation might begin thinking about relocating or recentering ourselves in God once again. My hope is that we might begin thinking of God as the center and not ourselves as the center of the universe anymore. And let's be honest, you have to admit, sometimes we do think of ourselves as the center of the universe. Even though we may claim to be baptized Christians, every now and then we act like we're self-centered Christians. Sometimes we say we worship the Holy Trinity, the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit, but we act like we worship the other Trinity, the me, myself, and I. To cop genre from Jeff Foxworthy. You remember Jeff Foxworthy? You might be a redneck. I've got a new genre. It's called, you might think you're the center of the universe if. Now, you might think you're the center of the universe if you think there's a guy driving slowly in the passing lane. You see a guy driving slowly in the passing lane and you accuse him of doing it just to make you mad. You might think you're the center of the universe if it rains on the day you wanted to take your boat out. You cry out to the Lord, why does this always happen to me? You might think you're the center of the universe if you think all you need to do to change a light bulb is to hold that light bulb next to the socket and let the whole world revolve around you. When I was 12 years of age, it was one day near the beginning of a new school year, and I noticed this pretty girl sitting up near the front of the class. My desk was near the back. I don't know why they teachers always put me at the back. Actually, I do. Big mouth. This pretty girl sitting up near the front of the class, kind of diagonally from where I was sitting near the back of the class. And my teacher, 6th grade teacher, Miss McIntosh, was up at the front of the class teaching. And she turned around to write something on the board. And when Miss McIntosh turned around to write on the board, I noticed that pretty girl near the front of the class. She turned around and she smiled at me. Now, I have to tell you, I never experienced a pretty girl at the age of 12 smiling at me. And my heart started to beat a little quicker, and I sat up a little taller, and I smiled right back. And Miss McIntosh continued to teach. She turned around to write on the board one more time, and that pretty little girl turned back to me, and she waved at me and smiled. I could not believe it. I'd never had that before, so I smiled and I waved right back. And then Miss McIntosh turned around and wrote on the board one more time, and that pretty little girl near the front mouthed the words, something to the effect of, "Let's walk home together after school." Wow! I never had experienced something like that. I must be quite a special guy. I must be pretty popular. I may not be as terrible as everyone tells me I look. Curly-headed, chubby kid and the pretty girl in class waving at me. Well, the bell rang and that pretty little girl put her books in her desk and she walked across the front of the class and she started walking down the aisle of the classroom, the aisle my desk was in, and she started walking toward me, and the closer she got, the bigger my smile got. She was smiling. I was sitting up taller. I was so excited. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I couldn't believe it. Here she comes. But my heart sank and my smile disappeared very quickly when she walked past me, and she turned and started talking to her best friend, who was seated right behind me. As it turned out, she was not smiling at me. She was not waving at me. She was not mouthing the words, "Hey, let's walk home together after school," to me. She was talking to her best friend. How embarrassing. I thought, did she see me waving? Was her best friend waving at the same time? I realized right then and there I was not the center of the universe. She was, of course, talking to her best friend who sat right behind me. Friends, Sabbath is many things. But first, and perhaps most importantly, I think it's important that we remember or think of Sabbath as a gift. Sabbath is the gift that protects us from ourselves. Sabbath protects us from thinking that the whole world revolves around us, or that we are the center of the universe. When we unwrap the gift of Sabbath, when we take it out of the package and begin to practice it, putting God first, it can protect us from our own narcissistic desire to win at all costs, or to conquer, or even destroy as individuals or as nations. It can protect us from our desire to be in absolute control or wield absolute power. Making God number one can be our greatest defense to the consumerist's gospel that preaches happiness through acquisition. That if we work longer hours, or we earn more money, we can spend more money and we can have more stuff, and then we might finally be happy. Then that emptiness or longing we feel within ourselves might finally go away, but we know those things tend to be only short-lived, if lived at all. Sabbath protects us from the misguided belief that we'll ever catch up on all those emails jamming up our inbox. No matter how many planning strategies we might employ, no matter how we create new schedules to get on top of it, we're just not going to get there. And putting God first reminds us that we're not first, that we're not God. It reminds us that there is a God, a very good God who's in control of the universe, and we're not it, and we don't have to be. What a liberating thought to know that we don't have to micromanage every single moment of our lives, or anyone else's for that matter. And yes, if you're 12 years of age, practicing Sabbath can prevent you from that cute but mistaken notion that the pretty girl at the front of the room is actually smiling at you and not her best friend who's sitting right behind us. Sabbath is the gift that helps us put God back at the center and allows us to find freedom with God at the center. It liberates us from the kind of things that preoccupy our minds and our time so often. Just listen to the voice of the prophet Isaiah. He says that the joy, the peace, the happiness that we long for in our lives, the emptiness we're trying to fill, the heights we're trying to reach, the things for which we hunger, he says, can be satisfied only in honoring the Sabbath. Which, by the way, if you haven't thought about it for a while, is the fourth commandment. Honor the Sabbath and keep it holy. And the fourth commandment, which allows us to keep the first commandment. You shall have no other gods before me. I am the Lord your God. That's it. And when we honor the Sabbath and we worship God, it takes the focus off us and it reminds us who is God and who is not. That there is a God and I'm not it. Isaiah says, if you refrain from trampling the Sabbath, from pursuing your own interests on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight and the holy day of the Lord honorable, if you honor it not going your own ways, serving your own interests, or pursuing your own affairs, then you shall take delight in the Lord. And I will make you ride upon the heights of the earth. I'm going to bless you with that peace, that kind of spiritual liberation that you're longing for. And I will feed you with the heritage of your ancestor Jacob. I will feed you on my word. I will feed you with my truth. In a world of lies, half-truths, deceits, fake news, alternate facts, I will feed you with a truth that will truly satisfy you if you honor the Sabbath. Now, does that mean that you can't go play a round of golf on a Sunday afternoon after being in church on Sunday morning? Does it mean you can't watch a football game on television later in the day, or swing by the mall or the grocery store to pick up a few things on your way home from church? Maybe. Maybe it does mean that. But then again, maybe it doesn't have to mean that. What Isaiah is talking about is a call to keep ourselves centered on God no matter what we're doing. To allow our hearts to go to the Lord in devotion no matter whether we're on a golf course or in the grocery store. Is your heart, are your thoughts, are you being focused and mindful on God and God's glory? That's how you put God number one and put yourself a little further down on that list. Some of you football fans may remember one of the most famous football players of all time, Gale Sayre. He had a book called I'm Number 3. See, everybody kept saying, you're number one, you're the best, you're the most fantastic player of all. And he said, no, I'm number 3. He says, God is number 1. God is number 1. And then my family, my spouse, my family, my church, they're number 2. I'm number 3. He said, whenever I get that out of order, that's when my life gets messy. That's when things get out of whack. I need to remember God is 1, family, friends, church, my Christian brothers and sisters. Number 2, I'm number 3. That's what Isaiah is asking us to do, to have hearts in devotion to God no matter what we're doing. Does not necessarily mean you can't go play a round of golf on a Sunday afternoon, but it does mean that whatever you do on the Sabbath should bring you rest, and rest in God. The word Sabbath itself comes from the Hebrew word Shabbat, which literally means rest. It's what God did on the 7th day. God rested, and if God can rest, why can't we? God was not a workaholic. Why do we think we have to be workaholics? God was not a perfectionist. Oh, God did everything perfectly and wonderfully, but God did not ruminate about it so that on the 7th day, God took stock on what He'd done the first 6 days. No, it said God rested. God practiced Shabbat on the 7th day. That's what Sabbath means, to rest in God. Doesn't mean to rest so that we can be more productive in our daily work. Doesn't mean to rest so that you can be faster when you get back to your run on Monday. Doesn't mean to rest on Sunday so that you can be more efficient at work on Monday through Friday or Saturday, whenever you work. There's an old story about 2 lumberjacks who were having a tree cutting contest. Some of you may remember this story. When I first heard it, I thought, that's such a great story. And then I thought about it and went, oops, that's not such a great story. See, it starts off like this. They were having a tree cutting contest among these lumberjacks up in British Columbia. And the idea was who could chop down more trees in a single day. And they took their top 2 tree cutters and gave them a full day to cut down as many trees as they could. One of the cutters, one of the lumberjacks, worked nonstop, cut down a lot of trees, axe down, fell a lot of trees in that day. But there was the other top lumberjack who every hour took a 10-minute break, rested. And in the end, it was the one who rested who cut down more trees. And the one who lost said, how could it be? I didn't stop once while I cut trees down. You rested 10 minutes every hour, and yet you've cut down more trees than I have. And that lumberjack who cut down the most trees said, well, what you fail to understand is that when I rested, that's when I was sharpening my axe. Now, as a person who's involved in a very industrious, capitalist world, that's a great story. If we want to be able to produce more, make more, if we want to be more efficient at work, if we want to get more done in fewer hours, we may want to take a break just to sharpen our axe, so to speak. But then I thought about the story a little more, and I thought, wait a minute. Sabbath isn't about us achieving more at work. As soon as Sabbath becomes that, our devotion to God is gone. It's really just about making us better. Better runners, better workers, better consumers, more efficient with our time, those sorts of things. No, it can't be just about us. That puts us back as the center of the universe once again. A friend of mine, and one of the most preeminent Old Testament scholars of our day and age, Walter Brueggemann, has written a book called Sabbath as Resistance, Saying No to a Culture of Now. And in that book, Walter Brueggemann says, Sabbath is not simply the pause that refreshes. It's not just there to sharpen your axe. It's the pause that transforms. Sabbath is there as a gift to help us remember who we are. God's holy and beloved, created in God's image, saved by Jesus Christ, empowered by the Holy Spirit. That's what Sabbath is about. We are restored to being more than who the world says we are. You know, the world who says, you're simply a taxpayer. You're a voter. You're a patient with a number. Get in line. You're a customer, a consumer, a client. No, Sabbath and the practice of Sabbath reminds us that we are the children of God, created in God's image, part of God's great and glorious story of love and grace for this world. We are more than what the world says we are. We are who God has made us to be. Sabbath doesn't simply refresh us, it restores us and it transforms us. Now, there is a truly wonderful story that I heard many years ago about an African missionary who was driving between two villages in his old truck one day down a bumpy, muddy road. And as this missionary was driving between these two villages, he came upon an Afrikaner who was sitting at the side of the road in some grass under a tree in the shade. And the missionary stopped his old truck and hopped out and went to the Afrikaner and says, "Where are you headed today?" And the Afrikaner said, "Well, I'm heading to the next village." The missionary said, "Hop in the truck, I'll give you a ride. It's no trouble. We'll be there very quickly." And the Afrikaner said, No, I'm resting right now. I'm good." And the missionary said, No, hop in the truck. It's really no problem. I'll get you there in 30 minutes or so. You can rest when you get there. And the Afrikaner said to the missionary, "Sir, thank you for your offer, but I've come a long way today already, and now I'm resting so that my spirit might catch up to my body." Friends, Sabbath reorients us to God. It puts God back at the center. It allows our spirits in God to be reconnected with our bodies and these lives that we're living. Sabbath isn't just about refreshing us, it's about transforming us, making us God's people once again. Now, I don't know if you noticed or you remembered that when Isaiah was first called to be a preacher, a prophet, God said, "Whom shall I send to preach my word?" And you all remember what Isaiah said. Isaiah jumped up, threw his hand in the air like Arnold Horshack from Welcome Back, Kotter, and said, Oh, here I am, Lord. Send me, here I am." But now here we are, as Isaiah is calling us to remember the Sabbath, Isaiah is saying, look, if you call upon the Lord, if you cry out to the Lord, it's the Lord who's going to say, "Here I am. Here I am for you." It's a reminder to me, and I hope to all of us, that as we practice the Sabbath, as we put God back in the center and ourselves in the grace and the peace of that realm with God, that we don't have to do anything more than that. We don't have to jump up and say, "Here I am, I can produce more. I'll rest and sharpen my axe so I can cut down more trees for you." No, all we have to do is live in peace because God says to us, here I am for you. Praise be to God. Amen.